A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So, you are a CIA officer, and you are walking into a high-end commercial bank with an FBI agent to investigate a massive terrorist financing operation. Now, here is the catch. Only one of you is actually allowed to tell the bank manager that you are law enforcement. The other one has to pretend they are, I don't know, a very intense auditor with a really nice watch.
That is actually a pretty accurate way to frame the tension, Corn. Today's prompt from Daniel is about that exact friction, the operational mechanics of how intelligence agencies and law enforcement collaborate while keeping their worlds strictly separated. He is asking how they protect agent identities and methods when these two very different cultures have to shake hands on a mission.
It is a classic church and state problem, but with higher stakes than a Sunday morning. And by the way, for anyone wondering about the voice behind the curtain, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It is the one making sure we do not wander too far off into the weeds, though I make no promises.
I will try to keep us on the path. But Daniel's question hits on something fundamental. We often lump the government into one giant bucket, but the line between intelligence gathering spying and law enforcement action arresting people is legally and operationally a massive canyon. If you cross it incorrectly, you do not just ruin an investigation. You might end up with a constitutional crisis or a burned agent whose life is suddenly at risk.
Right, because a spy's gold standard is secrecy, whereas a cop's gold standard is a conviction in open court. Those two things do not naturally want to hang out together. One wants to stay in the shadows forever, and the other has to eventually stand in front of a judge and say, "Here is exactly how I know what I know."
Precisely. You hit the nail on the head. The core of this is the separated model. In the United States and many Western democracies, we have this intentional divide. Intelligence agencies like the CIA or the NSA focus on foreign threats. Their customers are policymakers. Law enforcement, like the FBI's criminal division or local police, focus on domestic crime. Their customers are prosecutors and juries.
So why can't they just have a big group chat? If the NSA hears a guy in a basement talking about a heist, why not just ping the local sheriff?
Because of the wall. Historically, and especially after the abuses of the mid-20th century, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, created strict legal barriers. The idea was to prevent the government from using powerful foreign intelligence tools to bypass the Fourth Amendment rights of domestic citizens. Even though that wall was lowered significantly after 9/11 to allow for better dots connecting, the fundamental procedural difference remains. Intelligence work often uses methods that would never hold up in court: hearsay, intercepted foreign comms without a standard warrant, or sources whose very existence is a state secret.
So if you are a local detective and a guy from an agency taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, check the trunk of that blue sedan. You have a massive problem," you can't just tell the judge, "A spooky guy told me to look there."
You really can't. That's what we call tainted fruit. If the origin of the information is a classified intercept that didn't follow domestic search and seizure rules, the whole case could be thrown out. And that brings us to the first big mechanism Daniel asked about, how they actually work together without burning the source. The primary vehicle for this in the States is the Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF. These are fascinating because they embed local police officers, detectives from places like New York or Chicago, directly into FBI-led teams. These local cops get federal security clearances. They become the eyes and ears on the ground.
That sounds like a great way for a local cop to feel like James Bond for a week. but it also sounds like a paperwork nightmare. If I am a detective on a JTTF and I see a classified file, can I still go back to my precinct and talk to my sergeant about the case?
Only if the sergeant has the same clearance, which they usually don't. It creates this weird compartmentalization where the detective knows things they literally cannot act on in a normal capacity. They have to wait for the information to be sanitized. This is where the clean team approach comes in. It is one of the most technical ways they manage this.
Clean team sounds like a group of people who come in after a crime scene to scrub the floors. I am guessing it is slightly more bureaucratic than that.
A lot more. Imagine you have Team A, the intelligence team. They have all the wiretaps, the classified intercepts, the secret informants, they know everything. But they can't go to court because their methods are top secret. So, they pass a sanitized lead to Team B, the clean team. Team B is made up of agents who have never seen the classified stuff. They are told, go investigate this person for these specific reasons. They then have to find the evidence all over again using standard, legal, clean police work that can be presented in discovery.
Wait, so they are essentially doing the work twice. That seems incredibly inefficient, Herman. You are telling me the government is paying two groups of people to find the same pile of illegal stuff, just so they can pretend they didn't see it the first time?
It is the price of the Constitution, corn. Think about a high-level hacking case involving a foreign state actor. The NSA might have seen the hacker's keystrokes in real time through a highly classified vulnerability. But the FBI can't walk into a California courtroom and explain that vulnerability without giving the foreign government a roadmap to fix it. So, the FBI clean team is sent out to find the same evidence through public server logs or a standard search warrant on a domestic ISP. They act as if the original tip never existed.
It feels a bit like intelligence laundering. You take dirty secret info and you run it through the wash until it looks like a standard police report.
That is actually a term people use, parallel construction, and it is one of the most controversial parts of this relationship. It is basically the secret bridge between the two worlds. An agency like the DEA's Special Operations Division, which is a massive hub for intelligence sharing, gets a tip from a sensitive overseas source. They tell a state trooper, hey, stop this specific truck on I-95. The trooper doesn't know why. He just waits for the truck to swerve slightly over the line, pulls it over for a routine traffic violation, brings in a K9, and oops, finds 50 kilos of cocaine.
And in court, the trooper says, I saw him swerve, and the defense never knows that a satellite or a deep cover asset in Bogota was the real reason that truck was stopped. But what happens if the defense attorney is really sharp? What if they ask, Officer, why were you waiting at that specific mile marker at 3:30 a.m. on a Tuesday?
That is where the tension hits the breaking point. The officer has to stick to the clean narrative. If they admit there was an external tip they aren't disclosing, it triggers a massive legal review. By using parallel construction, the accuser becomes the state trooper and the K9, not the secret agent or the classified satellite. The goal is to protect the legend or the source. If the defense knew the real source, they would have a Sixth Amendment right to confront their accuser.
It is clever, but it feels a little bit like cheating. I mean, if the basis of the search was actually a secret wiretap that didn't have a domestic warrant, isn't that a violation of rights?
That is the exact point the ACLU and many defense attorneys make. They argue it undermines the judicial process because the court is seeing a manufactured reality. It's like a magic trick where the audience thinks the rabbit came out of the hat, but the rabbit was actually handed to the magician through a trapdoor they aren't allowed to see. But from an intelligence perspective, if you don't do this, you lose your sources. If a drug cartel figures out that their encrypted phone app is compromised because it was cited in a Brooklyn court case, they kill the source and switch apps. The intelligence, well, goes dry.
So how do they protect the actual human beings? Daniel asked about the identity of agents. If a CIA officer is in the field and has to coordinate with a local SWAT team for a raid, how do they keep their name off the evening news?
They use a few layers of shielding. First, there is the Intelligence Identities Protection Act of 1982. This is a heavy-duty federal law. It makes it a crime to intentionally out a covert agent. Agencies use this as a legal shield to refuse disclosure even under a subpoena. If a judge says, "Tell me who gave you this tip," the government can say, "Under the IIPA, we legally cannot."
I could tell you, but then I'd have to arrest myself for telling you.
Pretty much. But on a more practical, day-to-day level, they use legend identities. These are backstories supported by high-quality fake documentation. If a covert agent is working a joint mission with police, they might have a cover that identifies them as a member of a different, more mundane federal agency. They might be Bob from the Department of Commerce or Sarah from the National Park Service.
I would be very suspicious of a National Park Service guy showing up to a terrorist financing raid unless the terrorists were hiding in a giant redwood.
You'd be surprised how often boring covers work. In fact, Department of Agriculture is a classic for some reason. But the real high-level stuff uses the Classified Information Procedures Act, or CIPA. This is what I call the procedural glue. When a case goes to trial, CIPA allows the government to go to the judge in a private meeting, just the judge and the feds, no defense, and say, here is a piece of classified evidence. We want to use it, but we can't reveal the source. The judge then decides if the government can provide a summary or a substitution.
So instead of saying Agent 07 heard this, the paper says, a reliable source with access to the organization's leadership reported X. But how does that work in practice? Does the judge just take their word for it that the summary is accurate?
The judge actually reviews the original classified material in camera, meaning in their private chambers. They compare the raw intelligence to the summary the government wants to give the defense. If the judge thinks the summary is too vague or leaves out something that could prove the defendant's innocence, they can order the government to disclose more. If the government refuses because the secret is too sensitive, they might have to drop the charges entirely. It's a high-stakes game of chicken.
You mentioned blue-on-blue incidents earlier. That sounds like a nightmare. Two different agencies, both undercover, both trying to arrest the same guy, or worse, trying to arrest each other. How do they stop that from happening, if they are so obsessed with secrecy?
That is where deconfliction systems come in. The most famous one is called DICE, the Deconfliction Internet Connectivity Endeavor. It is used by the DEA and other agencies. Basically, it is a giant secure database where an agent can put in a target, like a phone number, an address, or a specific alias. The system doesn't necessarily tell you who else is looking at it, but it flags a hit. It says, hey, someone else has an interest in this number. You need to call this specific deconfliction officer.
So it is like a dibs system for spies. If I put a flag on a phone number, and you try to wiretap it tomorrow, the system tells us to hop on a secure call and figure out who is the lead dog.
It prevents the CIA from accidentally raiding an FBI safehouse. It sounds like a comedy plot, but in the 80s and 90s, before these systems were robust, it happened more than you'd think. Especially in the war on drugs era, where you had local, state, and multiple federal agencies all tripping over each other. There's a famous, almost urban legend-style story from Detroit where two different police units, one undercover as buyers and one undercover as sellers, ended up in a massive brawl with each other because neither knew the other was the law.
I'm imagining a scene where three different undercover guys all realize at the same time that they are the only ones in the room who aren't actually criminals. Wait, you're DEA. I'm FBI. I'm ATF.
It has happened, and it is dangerous. Not just for the mission, but because if you pull a gun on an undercover cop, you might get shot by someone who thinks they are doing their job. That is why the working relationship Daniel asked about is so focused on these invisible handshakes. They might not share the why or the how, but they share the where and the who just enough to stay out of each other's way.
It seems like this whole separated model is under a lot of pressure lately, though. I mean, between transnational crime, cyber warfare, and terrorism, the line between foreign and domestic is pretty blurry. If a guy in a cave in Afghanistan is using a laptop to hack a pipeline in Texas, is that a CIA problem or an FBI problem?
It is both, and that is exactly the point of friction today. The traditional model was built for a world of physical borders and distinct nation states. In the cyber world, those lines don't exist. This is where the FBI's National Security Branch comes in. It was created in 2005 specifically to bridge the gap. It combines the FBI's counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and weapons of mass destruction branches under one roof. They are the ones who have to balance being a spy one day and a cop the next.
It sounds like a personality disorder as a career path. You have to be secret agent man until the moment you have to be officer friendly in court.
It is incredibly difficult, and it leads to these second-order effects we should talk about. Because of these barriers, the wall, the need for clean teams, the deconfliction, everything moves slower. If a local police department in, say, Pensacola is dealing with a shooting at a naval base, and the FBI thinks there is a foreign intelligence link, the local police might feel frozen out. They are the ones who have to manage the local community and the crime scene, but the feds might be sitting on intelligence they can't share for operational security reasons.
That has to be incredibly frustrating for a local police chief. You have a crisis in your city, and the guys from DC show up and say, "We know something you don't, but we can't tell you, so just keep doing what you're doing, but maybe do it over there."
It creates massive trust issues. There was a case in 2019, the Pensacola shooting I just mentioned, where there was a lot of back and forth about accessing the shooter's phones. The FBI was working the intelligence angle, but the local authorities and the public were demanding immediate answers. Apple wouldn't unlock the phones, the FBI was using classified methods to try to get in, and the local sheriff was left in the dark. The gap between those two needs is where the political and social friction lives.
And what about the tech side? Daniel mentioned that he works in tech and AI. How does the rise of encrypted apps and going dark affect this separated model?
It makes the parallel construction even more tempting. If the only way you can catch a criminal is through a highly classified, technically complex exploit that bypasses end-to-end encryption, you are never going to want to show that exploit to a defense lawyer. You are going to use that exploit to get the info, then find a clean way to make the arrest, maybe by tailing the suspect until they make a mistake in public. This creates a feedback loop where the more advanced our tech gets, the more laundered our law enforcement evidence might become.
It's a bit of a black box justice system. You trust the output because the input is hidden behind a national security sticker.
That is the fear. But on the flip side, the agencies would argue that without these protections, they are effectively disarmed in the face of modern threats. If you force the NSA to reveal its methods in a common drug trial, you are burning a billion-dollar capability to catch a guy with a suitcase of cash. They see it as a matter of proportionality. They argue that the protection of the collective national security outweighs the absolute transparency of an individual criminal trial in certain specific cases.
I guess it comes down to who you trust more. The government to play fair behind the scenes, or the criminals to get away because we are too busy checking paperwork.
It's the eternal balance. And it is not just a US thing. If you look at the UK, they handle it slightly differently. They have MI5, which is their domestic intelligence agency, and then they have the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command, often called SO15. They work very closely, but even there, they have strict firewalls between intelligence and evidence. They use public interest immunity or PII certificates. A minister can sign a PII to keep secret info out of court if its disclosure would cause real damage to the public interest.
So, what is the takeaway for the average person who isn't a spy or a cop? Because this all feels very cloak and dagger and far away from our daily lives.
I think the first takeaway is that when you see a major investigation that seems to be stalling or where the government is being weirdly tight-lipped, it is often not incompetence. It is likely these clean team and parallel construction protocols at work. They are often building two cases at once, one to save the country and one to win the trial. It's also important to realize that the surveillance state isn't one monolithic entity. It's a bunch of squabbling departments that often can't even talk to each other because of these legal walls.
Right. It is the iceberg theory of justice. You only see the 10% that is above the water in the courtroom. The other 90% is the intelligence work that sanitized the lead. But does this ever go the other way? Does law enforcement ever accidentally burn an intelligence operation?
Oh, all the time. Imagine a local cop pulls over a car for speeding, finds a hidden compartment, and arrests the driver. Little does he know, that driver was a high-level informant that the CIA had spent 3 years embedding into a terror cell. By making a clean arrest for a traffic violation, the local cop might have just ended a multi-million-dollar intelligence operation. This is why deconfliction isn't just about safety, it's about protecting the long game.
It's like a giant game of chess where half the pieces are invisible and the other half are wearing different colored uniforms.
And for anyone in the legal or security profession, understanding these mechanisms, CIPA, DICE, JTTFs is vital. If you are a lawyer and you suspect parallel construction, you have to know how to challenge it, usually by looking for unexplained bleeps in the police narrative. If you are a security professional, you need to know which customer you are serving. Are you providing intelligence for a policy decision, or are you providing evidence for a legal one? You cannot mix them up.
It's about knowing which hat you're wearing, and maybe making sure you have a clean hat in your locker just in case.
It really is. And looking forward, I think the big question is how AI changes this. If an AI intelligence system flags a person as a threat based on 1 trillion data points, how do you provide a clean explanation for that in court? You can't just say the algorithm felt like it. We are moving toward a world where the source isn't even a human agent anymore, it's a proprietary model.
Your Honor, the AI says this guy is a baddie, but we can't show you the weights and biases because they are a trade secret. That is going to be a fun day in the Supreme Court.
It is coming. We are already seeing the beginnings of it with predictive policing and facial recognition. The wall is getting more complex, not simpler. The legal framework hasn't really caught up to the speed of the data.
Well, on that cheerful note of impending algorithmic shadows, I think we've covered the map. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It definitely pulled back the curtain on why things are so complicated when the feds and the cops try to play in the same sandbox.
It is a fascinating ecosystem. If people want to dive deeper into the unglamorous side of this, they should check out some of the research on spies as middle managers, or look up the church committee reports from the 70s to see why these walls were built in the first place.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us from accidentally outing any secret agents on air.
And big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that powered this show and keep the lights on in the digital booth.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the deep dives, find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and all the ways to subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and basically anywhere you can find a signal.
We will be back next time with another deep dive into whatever Daniel throws our way.
Catch you later.
See you.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.